The Last Minute Blues Podcast with Donny, Alex, Jeremy, and Jeff Burton.
Alex, do we know for sure that Jeremy Rutherford is in New York on business?
So I talked to him yesterday and today. There was a lot of noise behind him.
Okay.
But that could just be JR at his house being like, hey, Eli, talk real loud. Sarah, talk real loud.
Turn the TV up real
I
loud,
need to
guys.
make this sound like I'm at LaGuardia Airport right now. Come on. He took pictures of New York, of a hotel, I think, in New York. But, I mean, I got to be honest. JR's got stock photos from being a beat writer for 20-plus years.
Right, absolutely. So He's got friends that could get him a picture.
I'm going to drive to his house in Jefferson County and find out. I don't think JR. I think he was just like, I don't want to be on this podcast today.
Well, in the studio today, joining me, it's Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN. And there is so much to talk about with the Blues. Like, I had this whole thing that I was going to talk about with breakfast food and stuff with you, but then I started jotting down the notes during the game last night, and I was like, we're not going to have time for any of that sort of chit-chat.
Now I need to interrupt, because when you're doing your notes for the show, do you actually put down, like, let's get into breakfast food tomorrow?
Well, here's what I was thinking, okay? Just to be honest.
Yeah, we get into breakfast food still? We're good, guys.
I'm sitting there, and I'm watching, and I'm thinking to myself, well, let's have a light topic to sort of start things off with. Because at that particular time, I didn't know how the game was going to go, how it was going to finish, what we were going to talk about, But then, as I'm, like, sitting there, and I'm coming up with more things that I want to ask you about the team and the league, I'm like, man, we're gonna have to trim the fat. We can't do that.
No opportunity for eggs and bakey. We're gonna have to just dive right into this.
All right, now listen. All right, so as I dive right in, I want to start here. One of the things that has frustrated both you and I and Blues fans alike over the course of the last couple of years has been sort of the national hockey portrayal of Jordan Binnington, the goaltender.
Totally.
Always kind of just never viewed as the guy. You know, you never see, when they talk about goaltending around the league, they seemingly don't talk about the Blues having a really great tandem in Binnington and Hofer. And here in St. Louis, we get a chance to see Jordan Binnington on almost a nightly basis. Last night was another night that the Blues probably don't win if Benner is not in goal. And with the win last night, Jordan Binnington ties Mike Luit for the Blues' all-time winningest goaltender, which to me is, I'm so happy that it's him that's going to start breaking some of these records. What in the world, besides literally, I don't know, man, and I'm not even being facetious, besides Jordan Binnington putting Team Canada in the Four Nations or in the Olympics on his back, the Blues winning another Stanley Cup, what does that guy have to do to garner some love nationally as one of the best goalies in the league? Because, dude, we're not just saying this because we're from here. He is.
Yeah. I think you answered it in Team Canada and the Four Nations. That's going to be one of those moments because that's the whole world watching. Mm-hmm. For right now, the NHL watches them, but they watch them with a strict eye. Because they're waiting for more antics from Jordan Binnington. They look at this as, well, the team's been bad, and so ipso facto Jordan Binnington is bad. Mm-hmm. To where I was listening to, I think it was Marty Baron on TSN the other day, and they were talking about Jeremy Swayman and the Boston Bruins. And somebody brought up, Swayman, that's a mistake paying him that money. And Baron was like, whoa. He's like, well, let's wait on that. He's like, look, the defense hasn't been playing well in front of him. And Donnie, all my hair almost fell out. Because I'm thinking, no. I know. Well, dude, you make it look good, though.
You got beautiful locks. If you start losing those, I'm going to cry.
But I hear Marty Baron say this, and no disrespect to him. That's a goaltender. It's an analyst. He understands. But the narrative for another goalie who has been bad this season is, his defense ain't playing well in front of him. He's a great goaltender.
Mm-hmm.
But when Binnington had the season where it was an .897 save percentage, and you remember this was 2 years ago where everyone was like, this guy is trash. The narrative wasn't, the defense is giving up the most high-danger scoring chances in the National Hockey League, backdoor tap-ins that a goalie has no chance on, but that's not the defense's fault. That's the goaltender's fault.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to say is the narrative of Jordan Binnington, I think, has already been set by the national view. And you know how you switch that? The same way T.J. Oshie became an icon in the National Hockey League. You go out there and you have your moment in the Olympics. If he makes the Olympic roster, my guess is you're a Four Nations goalie. You're probably going to be on the Olympics, depending on how that Four Nations team goes. But I don't even think it has anything to do with the Stanley Cup. I think it's going to be the either Olympics, or I just think people are going to have their opinion on Jordan Binnington. Like, there's goaltenders in the NHL that wrapped up their career that people look at and like, yeah, he was good, but was he? And Jordan Binnington, unfortunately, might fall into that. Us in St. Louis, Curbs and I were talking about this on postgame the other night. And I'm going to get these years mixed up, but from like 79 to 85, the Blues had Mike Liu.
Mm-hmm.
From 85 until about 89, 90, the Blues had Rick Wamsley. There was another goaltender that I'm totally blanking on. I think Millen.
Oh, yeah, Greg Millen. Yeah.
And then they got to Cujo.
Mm-hmm.
So for in about a 10-year span, you had two number one goaltenders with a 3-year window of just a tandem. And then from 95, and then you had Fuhr step in until 99. So until 99, 2000, all the way up until Jordan Binnington stepped through the door in 2018-19, I don't know if you can say you've had a number one goaltender.
No.
You had Osgood for a small sample. You had Manny Legacy. You had Chris Mason. You had Jake Allen. You had Brian Elliott. But all of these guys were built as tandems.
Mm-hmm.
Brent Johnson as well. But you never had the dude that it was like, that guy's going to play 65 games for us, and he's going to keep us in every single game. Think about that. That was almost like, 25 years? 19 years that you went without a number one goaltender.
And it felt like it.
And it felt like it. Like, there was one year, I was looking at it last night because I went down this wild rabbit hole. There was one year in 2002, 2003 that the Blues went through 7 different goaltenders.
Oh, boy.
I mean, we went from Reinhard Dives to Curtis Sanford to Chris Beckford Sue. Like, they went through 7 dudes in one season.
Those names.
Right? I was like, whoa, blast from the past for 12-year-old Alex. But I find it so fitting that Jordan Binnington is tied and will break that Mike Liut record. And Jamal Mayers was in our booth, of course, the former Blue last night, and he was talking about it. He's like, one, it's wild that 151 games is the franchise record for wins amongst goalies in the NHL for the Blues, who've been here since 61, 62, or no, 67. But I find it so fitting, and so did Jammer, that Jordan Binnington is the one that's going to be at the top of that list. And I'm excited to see what his number is at the end of his time in St. Louis, because he's got 2 more years.
Absolutely so. And just the fact that Liut is his freaking agent.
I know.
On top of that, so you know that they're tight. Yeah. And that's just, I don't know, that makes it really cool. All right, so we have a lot of players for the Blues to ask about, but I wanted to ask about him on the last podcast, but we got wrapped up and I had forgotten to ask. Alex, can you talk a bit about Scott Perunovich over the course of the last couple of weeks? And listen, I'm going to make my, in watching the game last night, in watching Scott Perunovich, it feels like that is a young man that is finally playing with some confidence. Finally looks like he is kind of playing within his own skin, just looks a little bit more comfortable out there. So my question about Scott is, 1, what have you thought of him? And B, where does this sort of, does this change Scott Perunovich's, time here in St. Louis? Do you think it makes him more of a trade chip because he's played and maybe had some good games? What do you sort of think about this?
Man, so to answer that first question, he looks like he belongs. And I don't say that as disrespectful, because obviously Perunovich belongs. You're a very few select people get to the National Hockey League. But this was a Hobey Baker Award winner that I think even he had his confidence shook with the injuries and the lack of playing time. He looked like a guy that his confidence was just shook.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened, and it's got to be just that he found the back of the net. But since that Washington Capitals game, he's got 3 points in 7 games, and I think he finished his plus last night. I believe he's +4 in those 7 games. So plus minus, it's a fickle stat. Everybody talks about it.
Yeah.
But if you go look at a heat map, and what the heat map is it shows you, how he impacts the ice when he's on it and how the ice is impacted when he's not on the ice. The last 7 games in the offensive zone, it is a ton of red, which is basically offensive zone pressure when Perunovich is on the ice. On the defensive side, it is a ton of blue, meaning there's not a lot of offensive zone time for the other team when Scott Perunovich is on the ice.
So he's doing it on both sides.
He's doing it on both sides, man. He's confident. Joey and I were talking about this. I think it was prior to the Buffalo Sabres game. He is so confident right now that he's not worried about making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, I think it was, if I make a mistake, I'm going to the press box.
Right.
Now it's, look, there's injuries. You're not coming out of this lineup. You're going to be playing. And so I think that's allowed him the freedom to play a little bit more in the offensive zone. Look at the 2 goals he scored. They were both going towards the net rather than up at the blue line. I think he needs to shoot more still. I think they would tell him that. But, man, he's reliable in his own end right now. He's been playing with Justin Falk on the top pair, and I know they fluctuated those the other night. But he's also creating offense. And when you're generating offense as a smaller stature defenseman, that's how you won a Hobie Baker Award. So I don't know if – frankly, I don't know what the Blues look at him as in terms of long-term, because when you're healthy, you've got a Letty, you've got a Broberg, you've got a Suter. I think P.O. Joseph has been just as well. Mm-hmm. So you still got a lot of bodies. But when Perunovich is healthy and when the defense is healthy, if he takes this spot, it's his to lose. And so if he keeps playing like this, it's going to be hard to take him out of the lineup.
You know, I wanted to – last night in listening to the game, J.K. mentioned during the broadcast that Zach Bolduc is averaging 1 shot a game.
Yeah, that's another one that needs to shoot more.
I mean, what do you – and I know because I know the messaging to him, because he said it to the press, has been that the coaches want him to shoot more. How the heck do you get the friggin' kid to shoot more?
It's tough because you got to think of it in the sense of, well, when you're on the ice, and I don't remember what he played last night, but I think it was somewhere between 10 and 11 minutes. He played 8 or 9 minutes against the Minnesota Wild. When you're only getting 12, 13 shifts in a game, and think about maybe half of those shifts are going to be spent in your own zone because you're trying to retrieve the puck. You're coming out there. There's not a lot of opportunities. There's just not a lot of opportunities. And like watching him last night, he's doing everything other than shooting. And that's a good thing. Grant talked with him the other night for our pregame show. And Grant asked Bolduc, blunt, do you feel like you would benefit more from top playing time in the AHL or being at the NHL? And Bolduc said, oh, it's at the NHL. He's like, I need to learn the NHL game before I can be an effective NHL player. Mm-hmm. And so I want him to shoot more too. I think he's the same as Scott Perunovich right now, where as soon as he finds the back of the net for that first one, I think the confidence is going to pour out and you start to see a different player. But, man, he's physical. Mm-hmm. He defends his own zone well. He doesn't make dumb plays in the neutral zone. He's doing everything else away from the puck that, like, tells you, it's like, hey, this guy's an NHL player. It's just the offense, and the offense is going to come.
Right.
Like, the offense is going to come. Zach Bolduc is not going to just be a one-shot-per-game type of player. And if he is, well, then there you go. You didn't capitalize on your opportunity. But, man, like, watching him play, I'm seeing everything you want to see from, like, a middle six winger. It's just you got to find the back of the net. But I could say that about 5 or 6 guys on this Blues team right now, that they got to find the back of the net to snap that gorilla on their shoulder right now.
Yeah. So I want to ask about, not even ask about, I think, one, it was so amazing earlier this week to get the surprise news Robert Thomas was coming back. I did not think that it would be this quick.
I thought there was some voodoo doctor stuff going on. Like, what is going on right here, man?
He fractured his ankle. Yeah. It was less than a month ago.
Uh-huh.
And dude is back.
4 weeks exactly.
And then he's coming back, and you're like, okay, well, that's great. But then you're a little worried. How's he going to go? Is he going to look? And man,
his 19 minutes.
Dude, the difference in which that he made immediately was so apparent to me. And I guess it's something that I knew anyway, but boy, it's great to have Bobby Thomas back.
Oh my gosh. I mean, like, this is what, and I know people got like upset when I was talking about like the injuries and how to overcome those, and those aren't easy. And, you know, you make the comparison of like, hey, if you take the top centerman away from the Colorado Avalanche, what are they going to look like? And then everybody's response is, Thomas isn't Nathan MacKinnon. You're right.
Yeah.
But Robert Thomas is the Nathan MacKinnon to the St. Louis Blues, meaning that is a dude who plays in every facet of the game. And when you pluck him out of the lineup, you've got guys that are filling in that aren't comfortable in that spot. And I don't think it's just Thomas being back on the ice. It's Thomas being back on the ice, but it's Buchnevich being back on the wing.
It's how it filters
and
lets the forwards like settle to their, the positions that they should be in.
Yeah. I mean, like, you now have put one of the most underrated two-way forwards back in his natural habitat in Pavel Buchnevich. There's a reason I felt like that line has looked so good. And credit to Jordan Kyrou, because Kyrou's playing a heavy forecheck game right now that's resulting in that line creating scoring chances.
There were a couple times last night, I didn't interrupt you, there were a couple times last night where Kyrou looked a little pissy against the Sharks, and I loved it.
Dude, he, God, who was it against? He threw a couple of haymakers at somebody post-whistle because they laid a late hit on him. I forget which player it was on the Sharks, but he's forechecking too. Like, he's laying the body down when the puck goes in to retrieve puck battles. And that is something that we haven't seen. And that's what works so well with Robert Thomas. Thomas can create space. Kyrou can finish. It's just a matter of creating those scoring chances. But, I mean, Thomas's first period back, he went 5 for 5 in the faceoff dot. Like, what are we doing here, man? Like, I've been out for 4 weeks, and I show up, and I'm just cool. I'll win 100% of my faceoffs.
Right.
So, like, he wins the faceoffs. Your power play looked better. Your 5-on-5 defensive game looked better. That's what happens when you've got a top player in the league. He will win a Selke Trophy at some point in his career. I believe he will be a 100-point player at some point in his career. And when you play 4 weeks without him, that's what it looks like. But when he's back, that's also what it looks like.
I really love Radek Faksa. Like,
he's the one that looks like he woke up and somebody kicked him.
It is just that he just plays pissy all of the time. And you talk about a guy that seemingly is every shift doing something right or really working hard, man. That WTF line is fantastic.
I like to compare Radek Faksa to John Wick. Like, it looked like somebody killed his dog, and he's going to get out revenge for it. And that's how he plays every shift. Like, in the middle of a scrum, somebody just, like, coughs, and Fox is like, what the hell is that? And then jumps in on his teammate. Like, right. I mean, that's why when they acquired him, I remembered Faksa from that 18-19 Cup run with the Dallas Stars, because I was like, dude, that dude was a pain in the ass to play against. And that's how he plays. I mean, think of the goal that Nathan Walker scored. Forecheck, retrieve the puck, force a turnover, by the way. And how'd you force that? Because that player was like, knows Fox is going to hit him. Right. And then he comes away from the boards with the puck, puts it on Walker's stick. That WTF line, it's not the same, because I think that Steen, Barbashev, Sundqvist line had more offensive upside. Mm-hmm. We saw Barbashev, he's a 30-goal scorer. Steen, you know what he was. But it's the same in the sense that when you put them on the ice, you know exactly what they're going to do. Yeah. Like, they're so good right now. I wonder if last night Drew Bannister was questioning, man, pulled goalie, my guys are gassed on the ice. Do I put that WTF line out there? Yeah. Think about that. In a 1-goal lead with 90 seconds left and the goalie pulled, you might put Walker, Faksa, and Toropchenko out there. Yeah. That's how good that line – I shouldn't say that's how good. That's how responsible that line has been on the ice.
All right, I want to ask a couple of things, and then we got to go around the NHL, including to talk, obviously, about Jim Montgomery being let go earlier this week in Boston. But I wanted to throw a couple of notes here. Blues are scoring first, or at least have in a handful of their last
5 of their last 6 or 6 of their last 7.
And boy, oh boy, does that change the whole tone of that evening, and it just allows you to kind of breathe and get into your own game.
Well, I mean, remember last year, right, Donny? It was 24 straight games that when the opponent scored first, the Blues would lose. Yeah. Like that, when that would happen, and sometimes it would happen 25 seconds into the game, and you're like, oh, cool,
here we go.
This game's over.
Right.
Now, at least at the first part of the season, it was the other team scores first, and you're thinking, oh, well, the Blues will come back. And then it got into a little bit of the other team scores first, and it's like, oh, geez, what's going to happen? Now it does feel like more of a wild card with the Blues, which is progress. Like, I know it doesn't seem like progress, but like if any scenario takes place, they score, you score first, it still feels like the hockey game could go either way. And that's what I think it's supposed to be. Minnesota Wild felt that way. Like, they scored first, and you were thinking, it's like, okay, we're still into this one. You scored first against San Jose the other night. It did feel a lot more of a breath of fresh air, but it still felt like, hey, San Jose could come back into this one. And I think that's the growing pains of this team right now, to where there's going to be mistakes. Those mistakes are going to end up in the back of your net. But how do you push back on those? And we've seen them push back a lot this season.
Yeah. All right, real quick here. Philip Broberg, any sort of idea? I know he's skating, but any idea when he might be back?
So from what Joey was saying, he's off his cast, off his crutches. He is skating. I believe Joey said he's going to join this team on this road trip. Now, he's not playing, but it's kind of similar to Robert Thomas, where he's going with them so he could continue to skate.
Kind of work his way back in.
Stay on the regimen and be with the team whenever they practice. I would still say you're looking at December. If you want my conspiracy theory, which I love giving all the time.
I know you do.
I want to circle December 7th when the Blues go off to Western Canada to play against a team that didn't decide to match the offer sheet of that player. That's just a guesstimate by me. Be a great story. Like, I in my head, I hear like the trumpet. Broberg comes on the ice, just scores a goal, picks up 3 points.
Dude, and you know what? But watching Dylan Holloway last night,
Dude, he's good too, man.
Dude, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like these offer sheets look like an absolute, complete, and total steal by Doug Armstrong.
You've added assets to the core of your team that you didn't have. Like, again, I go off of the retool. I do the air quotes. People saw the air quotes, right? I do the retool because you had a lot of pieces. You had the number one centerman. You knew that from last season. You had a top defenseman, whether you want to label him a number one, a top pair, whatever. You've got a goalie and a goaltending tandem. And then it was just finding more stuff. You've had some depth. You were looking for another top pair defenseman and more depth at the wing. And, man, Holloway has been that for you. You all know Broberg. He's potential top pair guy. He's looking like that, no question. But, man, Dylan Holloway, think about this. He's a winger, but he's been playing center, and you haven't even been talking about it.
Yeah.
Because he's been decent at it. And, like, he's 22, 23 years old. There's still some growing pains that come with him. I would imagine some people are going to feel it's a disappointment for Holloway because he had such production in the playoffs, and people are like, oh, this guy's a 30-goal scorer. Played with Draisaitl in the playoffs. Like, that's a lot different.
It's going to help you.
Yeah, that's a lot different than playing the third-line center position with the Blues that's retooling. But, man, you see the speed. You see the inability to lose a battle. Like, he always seems to come out with a puck when you go into the boards. It reminds you a little of Jaden Schwartz, to where it was like every time he's got the puck, you're thinking it's like, good luck getting it away from him.
Right.
So, I mean, you've added a couple more weapons to this team to where now you can actually push whenever you're ready to.
What do you think a ceiling is for Holloway?
I'd say middle six winger.
Mm-hmm.
I would say second, third line winger, but you're talking kind of like Brandon Saad, where 20 goals, 20, 25 goals. Like, and it's going to be a little bit. Like, obviously, you got to get accustomed. You got to get the depth down the middle of who's your centerman. But what I'm more curious about is, do they stick with him at center, or do they move him back to the wing once the depth starts showing up?
Sure.
Because you do have a lot of centermen in the system. Like, you've got Zach Dean, you've got Kaskamaki, who I know they're using on the wing. Yeah, Dvorsky, who would essentially push Shen down to a third-line center spot when Dvorsky's here. So you'll have the depth. It's just a matter of where you want to go with it.
Well, the biggest story, I believe, in the NHL this week was the Boston Bruins firing the highly respected, I believe his winning percentage is over 600, if I'm not mistaken, Jim Montgomery, and replace him, at least temporarily, with Joe Sacco. Obviously, Boston was not going particularly well, but this is a really kind of crazy situation because as this is coming together, you know, the Blues are in kind of a spot where, are we retooling? Are we going for the playoffs? We just signed a coach to a 2-year deal. But, you know, and there's also other teams out of the NHL that could absolutely use a person like Jim Montgomery. Hello, Detroit.
Hello, Montreal.
Hello, Montreal. You know, so, like, Alex, how do you see this breaking down? Because for me, one of the things that I see as prohibitive is the cost, is that you are still paying Berube, you would be paying Drew Bannister, and then you would be signing Jim Montgomery to a big deal.
So you're not paying Berube still.
You're not paying Berube
when
still.
Toronto signed him, if I'm understanding this right, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is when Toronto signed him, they bought out the rest of his contract with St. Louis, and so he's not being, because this would be the final year of his 3-year deal with the Blues, but again, I could be incorrect with that, but at least from what I was told, his contract was bought out by the Blues when Toronto hired him.
Here's the thing. As just a fan, I get completely titillated with the idea of Jim Montgomery coming back here and being a head coach.
I think you're not the only one.
And you can use that as you know, you can use that term exactly.
Titillated. that's the title of the podcast. Donny is titillated.
but maybe it should be. But that's but that said, I don't think that Drew Bannister has done a bad job. Yeah. I think that Drew Bannister has done fine with what he has been given. So I don't necessarily think that he has done anything to warrant getting fired. That said, you don't have an opportunity to hire a guy that you clearly liked last offseason. I mean...
Yeah. No, you're spot on.
So what do you think?
This is such a weird spot to be in if you're Drew Bannister, if you're the Blues. Like, first you got to figure out, like, how you got here. So the reason that this is even being talked about is because Fluto Shinsawa from The Athletic, the Boston Bruins insider, which essentially JR for Boston, when Montgomery was fired, he put the piece out on The Athletic that said the number one destination he believes for Jim Montgomery will be St. Louis. Now, it never said St. Louis this season. It just said St. Louis. But he also listed Detroit, Montreal. I think Nashville was on there.
And I do want to mention real quick that the reason that a lot of this is happening is because isn't Jim Montgomery's wife from St. Louis, and they have family here currently.
And that's what Fluto referenced in there. He said a couple of reasons why he believed. One, Doug Armstrong gave him a chance when he got fired from Dallas to come back, and he had a lot of success in those 2 years, which got him the job in Boston. He had a great relationship with a lot of the players that are here, including Kyrou, Thomas, Buchnevich, but then his wife being from St. Louis. That was what Fluto referenced in his piece on The Athletic. So that is why people started talking about it immediately, on top of the fact that, look, Jim Montgomery was speculated potentially going to the Blues in the playoffs last year. Remember, because Boston almost lost in round one.
Yeah.
And the speculation was, well, he's not going to be back. And then they made it to round two. I think it was game 7. And then 3 days later, the Blues hired Drew Bannister. So there was a speculation surrounding that at the time with Jim Montgomery in St. Louis. They hired Drew Bannister. Doug Armstrong has the press conference. He talks about, look, this is still a retool. We believe we're building towards something, but the focus right now is developing our younger players and getting us to a spot where we can compete. That was the mindset. And what shifted and what I believe has kind of pushed people into the spot of saying, like, Jim Montgomery, St. Louis, the expectation on the Blues, personally, I believe, has shifted. It's no longer just a retool team. I think the moment that Broberg and Holloway were signed to those offer sheets and then
changed the game.
Edmonton didn't match it, it changed the game. And Doug Armstrong said that, too, at the press conference. He said, look, we have now given our team the pieces to compete, and we believe we can be in the mix with other playoff teams. So you've put playoff expectations. Now, whether you meant to or not, people saw that and said, okay, well, you believe you're a playoff team now. You bring in Suter, you bring in Joseph, Foxa, and you go get Broberg and Holloway. Get to the playoffs. And when a guy like Jim Montgomery becomes available, everyone is going to point to that and say, okay, well, he was winning Dallas. He got to the playoffs every year. When he was in Boston, got to the playoffs every year. That's the guy that's sitting out there right now. This has got to suck for Drew Bannister.
Yeah.
Like this noise surrounding Drew Bannister can't be fun because it's 75 games. You haven't even coached a full season in the NHL yet.
Right.
And people are talking about, oh, yeah, he should be fired to bring in Jim Montgomery. Like, he's kept your team at 500. Last year, he got you to a respectable position where you could have gotten to the playoffs. But I think the reason so many Blues fans are talking about this is because it's Jim Montgomery. He was tied to the Blues. He's had postseason success. And it seems like the Blues have opened that, or at least in their minds, believe that the window is open to start being a playoff consideration team. And I go back to, for me, and I thought JR laid this out really well in the Athletic article to where he looked at both sides of the conversation, saying, like, look, if this really was a retool and we saw Bolduc playing and Matt Kessel playing and Scott Perunovich playing, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Like, Montgomery would be out there be like, cool, doesn't matter, you're in a retool. But the reason that this come up is because they want to see if this Blues team is a playoff contender, and that's why Montgomery's name's there. So I really don't know what's going to happen. The other part that I think a lot of people have to ask is Montgomery wanting to go right back into coaching?
Correct.
Because, I mean, we've seen this before where a coach gets fired, and it's like, I kind of look at Berube. Like, he gets fired, and he's like, no, I kind of just want to sit this one out. He was doing TNT. He was doing some scouting, I believe, with the Blues. And then it was like, I'll wait till the offseason. So that could be where Jim Montgomery is at, but it's going to be there no matter what until Jim Montgomery gets hired.
So I want to ask this. Man, one of the reasons that I even think that this is at all possible is because it seems as though the NHL head coach, that job is a little bit more, I don't know,
fickle
than it ever has been before. So, like, I don't put a whole heck of a lot of stock in, well, he hasn't been here for very long, to me, because it just seems like they're going to, that position is moving so quickly these days that I don't know.
And so that's a really good point. That's the question I think Blues fans have to ask, because if you're talking Jim Montgomery and I want Montgomery and get rid of Bannister, the life cycle for coaches is about 3 years in the NHL. Yeah. And if you don't believe me, just go look back through. Drew Bannister, if I'm not mistaken, is the 21st longest tenured head coach.
Which is bananas.
That dude was hired in December of last year. Or this year. Yeah. Sorry, this year. Like, the three coaches that 2 years ago were in the Jack Adams Award conversation for the best coaches in the NHL are all on different teams now, are all fired. They're all fired.
Yeah.
So the life cycle is 3 years. And that's the part that I think a lot of Blues fans are asking and why Montgomery's name's coming up. Are you telling me that you're still in a retool? Because if you are, then let Bannister work with these guys. Because you don't know. You might have a Jared Bednar or a John Cooper who could win with these players because he's developing with them. Do you give him a longer leash? But if you've put the expectations of being a playoff team, who gets you there? And this is a guy who's got a .600 winning percentage in the National Hockey League. This is a guy who's had success in 2 different places. But understand that if you bring that guy in, the life cycle's not very long,
right? Because
coaches don't last very long in the NHL. So do you want to jeopardize that if that's your guy? And I always fall back to Doug talking in the offseason about the depth of this team feels a lot like 2010, 2011, 2012 in that window. And at that time, that depth had a lot of younger players. I think it was 18 players, 25 or younger, that were on the Blues roster. They made the decision to move on from Davis Payne and bring in Ken Hitchcock a year and a half into Davis Payne's tenure. It was 13 games where they said, nope. And Doug Armstrong's quote, because I looked up this press conference, when they fired Payne and brought in Hitchcock was, look, we felt like the young players weren't going in the direction that we needed them to go, and we wanted to bring in a coach who could get them there with a winning pedigree. Read that as you may, you can't say that Drew Bannister hasn't gotten these young players in the right direction. Kyra's a point-per-game player and in a plus. People were complaining a lot about that. Jake Neighbors has got 6 goals on the season. People were wondering about that. Broberg has emerged as a top-pair defenseman. Dylan Holloway's looked good. So you cannot say that Drew Bannister's not pushing these young players in the right direction. Right. But if you put playoff expectations on the Blues and that guy's sitting there and he gets hired elsewhere and that team goes to the playoffs, like, how upset would a Blues fan be? And, Donny, you can give that perspective if Montgomery gets picked up by the Detroit Red Wings next week and Detroit goes on this weird run and makes the playoffs next year.
I don't know that would make me upset, though, because for me, this is just a weird timing thing.
Yeah.
I feel like if we were a year further along in this, I don't know that we're having the discussion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it might be time to make that change, but also at the same time, I want to ask you this. So you are the general manager of this team, and Jim Montgomery is out there right now, able to be gotten. What team are you that is busting ass to try to get Jim Montgomery to come and coach your team?
I mean, the Blues are going to be in that conversation. I'm going to be talking about it because of the expectations I put on here. But if I'm another one, I'm Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, we all talk about the Yzer plan, right? Everybody's talking about how Yzerman's got this plan in place. Has anybody seen that working? I think they're 6th or 7th in their division right now. Like, if I'm Detroit and they brought in that Derek Lalonde, who was the assistant coach in Tampa with John Cooper, and I thought that one was going to be successful. It has not been. So I think every team, you have to do your due diligence in calling and saying, like, does this make sense for us? Yeah. Do we want to pursue this? Is this the right move? Because we don't want to jeopardize anything. But, like, if I'm a team, and I think the teams that should be busting ass to do this are the teams that believe they should be in the playoff spot this year. So that puts Detroit in that conversation. It puts Montreal in that conversation. I believe it puts St. Louis in that conversation, at least to talk about it. But you just have to decide what direction you feel is best for your team.
Man, I love this part. All right, a few things here real quick. I don't want to be a hater. I know that you're going to disagree with me
Donny.
here, but I am not wowed by the Blues Winter Classic jerseys. The lowercase T, I don't understand.
The lowercase T.
I'm like, and it's not like, and listen.
Hold on. Not having the blue note on the chest, the lowercase T is what got Donny.
I can see it in my head right now, and it doesn't make any sense. It feels like somebody accidentally hit the cap or hit shift while they had the caps on.
And then you go back and like, son of I printed these already.
Damn it, we made 10,000 of these things. But I am just not super overwhelmed. But then I think about them playing on New Year's Day at Wrigley Field against the Chicago Blackhawks, and they could be wearing a clown costume. It's true. I think that it's still gonna be friggin' cool as hell.
I will say this because I saw one in person last night. They look really cool in person.
All right.
So they don't look great on Twitter or X, wherever you see it, but the the gold/yellow stripes, dude, they pop. They pop,
right.
And it's got the light blue still, shades of that first Winter Classic.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers, I think, are really cool in terms of the font and how they're structured. It's not my favorite. Nothing will ever beat the first Winter Classic. Like, nothing will ever outplay that.
Yeah.
This one, though, it's a lot better in person when you see it. I personally don't like not having the crest or the blue note on the crest. I just like, I understand, but I was this way with the Cardinals too, where they had the Lou on there.
Yeah.
I was not a fan. Like, I know everyone was like, "Oh, this is awesome." I hate it.
Yeah,
like,
see,
the whole point of the team. Oh, see what's going on here, Donny? It was because the T wasn't lowercase, right?
Probably.
It was all caps. I don't like that. Like, I don't like. I know it's old school. It looks cool. I personally just like the big logo on the chest, however you do it. So that's just me. But I will say, for people that are doubting it, don't worry too much about the lowercase letters. When you see it in person, it does look a lot cooler.
Really, really disappointing to see the season that Alex Ovechkin has been having, and that chase to Wayne Gretzky that last year we were all kind of wondering, I wonder if he's going to be able to do that. Yeah. And then the conversation from the second half of the year until he got hurt was, it's just a matter of time as to when.
Yeah.
And so not only is he hurt, but he fractured his fibula?
His left fibula is what they said.
And only 4 to 6 weeks for that. Science and medicine is freaking amazing. That's insane.
I personally, because he's, almost 40 years old,
yeah.
I was thinking like, oh, no way. Yeah. There's no way 4 to 6 weeks. But, I mean, doctors are wild these days when it comes to these athletes. So it sucks because I still think he's going to beat it. It's not like he's not going to get there. A fibula, it's not a fun thing to break, but it's not like we're talking about a sprained ankle or something. He'll come back. I don't know if he'll really miss a step. The confidence, though, was soaring with Ovechkin.
Yeah.
Here's the part that really sucks. I thought he was going to get there and be close to it by the time the Blues played him again in February.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, am I going to get to watch Ovechkin hit Gretzky's number while they play the Blues? Like, I don't know if you want to be the Blues when he does that.
Right.
But, he'll come back. I think he still gets there this year just because he's been on a wild pace. And I hope it doesn't take away from how great of a season he was having. Like, he comes
and
back
the Capitals, too.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The Capitals are still finding ways to win. Like, they need to stay relevant so that when Ovechkin comes back, you got that confidence right away. Because I don't want it to be like, oh, Ovechkin disappeared and then the team fell off and then the chase doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Like, the reason I think it was so exciting was because Washington was still good. I don't know. It's still going to be an awesome moment. I don't know if it's as awesome of a moment if that team's on a playoff team.
I would agree. It definitely makes it better that he's kind of leading this charge and leading the resurgence of the Capitals.
It feels like the last push for Alex Ovechkin to get a Stanley Cup on top of breaking Wayne Gretzky's record. Now, I don't think they're going to get a Stanley Cup. I still think they're a little bit of frauds, but it feels like it's Ovechkin's. I think he's got one more year after this. It's like the last hurrah to try and get a Stanley Cup before he goes off into the sunset.
What in the world is going to happen in Pittsburgh? I mean, because
what can happen in Pittsburgh?
Well, because I mean, you're going to continue to be probably cheating until Crosby retires, because you're never going to rebuild that thing while he's there, because he's there. But at the same time, that situation just seems like a mess.
Oh yeah.
I am. I understand that the Blues have a mountain to climb and we've got a lot of work to do. But, man, if you're a Penguins fan, I think you got to be looking at that roster going, where do we start? How does this work? You know what I mean?
So let me ask you this. You're the GM. You did this to me a little earlier.
Yeah.
You're the GM. You trade Crosby? Crosby comes to you and says, look, I don't want to be traded, but I understand you got a job to do. So if you find me the right spot, I'll listen. Would you trade him? Because I have my opinion. I want to see yours.
Honestly, and the answer isn't necessarily as hockey related as anything. I think if you're Pittsburgh and you trade him, and you then, because if you trade him, you are rebuilding. You are starting from friggin' scratch.
Oh yeah.
And that is a long haul back up.
Yep.
I don't think monetarily the Penguins can do that.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that just does not make that much sense for a market that is not really all that much bigger than St. Louis. I do think that, though, that they're owned by like one of those like capital groups,
I think it's
though.
the dude that owns the Celtics, if I'm not the Celtics.
So
the
money
Patriots,
probably not.
So
money probably not an issue there, but I just don't know that you can do that. You can trade him.
So here's my thought process with it. I have to rebuild, but I'm going to rebuild with Crosby. If Crosby wants to be here, that's going to be the biggest thing. I'm going to approach Malkin. I'm going to approach Letang. I'm going to approach Carlson and say, where do you guys want to go?
Right.
This is going to be bad. It's going to be ugly. I want to give you a shot to win a Stanley Cup. Where do you want to go? Mm-hmm. So then I could get them off the books, and I got to get the commitment from Crosby because Crosby's going to have to want to be here. But I look at Crosby and be like, look, we're going to be bad. But we want you to go down as a legend in Pittsburgh, the same way that Mario Lemieux went down. But we also want you to be here so that the next Sidney Crosby, when we draft him first overall, works under you for a couple of years. You know,
lives at your house.
Yeah, lives at your house. Macklin Celebrini's doing this with Joe Thornton right now. We want the next Sidney Crosby to learn how to play Penguins hockey with Sidney Crosby. That's what I would do, because if I get rid of Malkin and Carlson and Letang, my team's going to be bad. Even with Sidney Crosby, it's going to be bad. Now, again, you got to get Crosby on board with this, and that's going to be the part that I don't know if he's willing to do. You at least have a shot to compete, even if your team is bad, with the players that you have. But, man, I'd start rebuilding and start getting bad now so that I could get a couple of top 3 picks to play with Crosby for however many years he plays before he retires.
Are those contracts movable?
No. God, no.
So Carlson, Malkin, Letang.
Yeah, if you're Pittsburgh, you're going to have to eat. You're going to have to eat 50%. Now, the good news is the cap's going to go up next year. Not enough to bring in. I don't think Letang's isn't awful. I think Letang's is $6 million or something like that. Malkin's isn't awful. I think his is around $7 million. Now, I'm saying it's not awful, but for a team that's cap-strapped, it's awful.
Right.
Carlson's is rough.
And doesn't Carlson have a ton of term on that thing, too?
Yeah, I think he still has 5 or 6 more years. And I think Letang has 4 more years to it. You're going to have to eat, and you're going to have to do what Minnesota did, where you're just going to be bad with a lot of money tied to you. And then after that, that's when you hope to start compete, because as you're bad for 3 years and no cap space, you're bringing in top picks, 2nd overall, 1st overall, 5th overall, 8th overall, and all of those guys are playing with this team with Sidney Crosby. That's what I would do. But again, I don't know if Crosby wants to do that. And frankly, if you're Malkin and Letang, why would you want to go anywhere?
Yeah.
You gave me a contract. I'm here. I want to finish here.
All right. Well, here's the thing. I got to go be on the radio.
You got to do radio?
Which I
got to do radio.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to go out to Centene.
Yeah.
I've just been sitting here jibber-jabbering, and you got to go somewhere.
It's fine. BK can do all of this work himself. I just show up and have my good looks on YouTube.
Well, that's what you got Tanner there for as well.
Yeah, no, Tanner took a personal day today, because he works so hard. That's right, T-Bone. Shots fired at you.
Now, stop it. I have seen the prep that Tanner puts together for you guys. It's friggin' impressive,
no, he
man.
copy and pastes what I send to him. He copy and pastes all of it. I say, hey, T-Bone, I want you to feel good. So here you go.
So when somebody is asking about the work that's done for the podcast, do you take all the credit for that?
Yeah, totally. Donny doesn't do anything. Donny doesn't do anything. Donny
he doesn't even watch the games.
Yeah, he doesn't watch the games. No,
ladies and gentlemen,
I do nothing.
Well, for our homeboy, Jeremy Rutherford, who is
possibly
allegedly in New York right now with athletic corporate meetings. Our homeboy, Jeff Burton, who I thought about every time Clem Costin touched the puck last night.
Clem Shady, ladies and gentlemen, getting into scrums.
Absolutely.
Nathan Walker almost went at it with him, and I loved it.
I thought it was going to happen, man. I was hoping it was going to happen.
Jeff would have loved that.
Dude, he would have loved it. All right, so for our boys, Jeff and Jeremy, Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN, I'm Donny Fandango. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Last Minute Blues podcast. And as always, let's go Blues.
The Last Minute Blues podcast. Hear more at 1057thepoint.com.